Shabbat brings us together, and Simcha brings us together, and commemoration, memory of loved ones who have passed on brings us together. I want to talk for a few minutes about how it is that we relate to people who are going through one kind of struggle or another. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be mental, it could be spiritual. So years ago, just around the time that I was serving at the Shelter Rock Jewish Center, where I got to meet the Bloom family, I took a class called Clinical Pastoral Education. And the point of that class, it was an extended program really, was to enable people who wanted to be clergy of any faith to be able to relate to patients in a helpful way. So I actually interned at a hospital, Lenox Hill Hospital, and I would go from room to room and I would sit with patients and speak with them. And there was one patient, a woman in her 90s, I was told that she identified as Irish Catholic. I walked in, I started to chat with her, and she said to me, she had an Irish accent, which I will not try to reproduce. She said to me, "Can you bless me, Father?" And I went into a whole explanation. Well, I'm studying to be a rabbi. I'm not actually going to be a father, though I am a father. I have kids. I talked on and on and on. And she looked at me and she asked, "Are you done talking yet, Father?" And I said, yes. She said, "Can you give me a blessing?" And I said, absolutely. As anybody knows who's been in the hospital or who has suffered an illness or challenge of physical or emotional or mental proportions, it can be extremely difficult. It can feel isolating. You can get depressed and despondent. And it is so important for us not just to know what the right things are, but to know what the wrong, unhelpful things are. Because sometimes what we tend to do with people in this situation is we say things that are not so helpful, that in a way run the risk of blaming them for the situation that you're in. Why didn't you see a doctor sooner? Maybe if your diet were different, maybe if you exercised more. We say all kinds of things potentially that don't help. And it's not that there isn't a place for people to receive some kind of instruction that could be helpful. It's that in those moments, what we are doing in effect, out of our own awkwardness perhaps, is saying to this person, it's your doing. And that never helps. The parashah which Ian spoke about this morning speaks of the Kohanim who would diagnose, but they didn't just diagnose, they would go to where the person was, and they would somehow escort the person, if need be, michutz lamachaneh, outside of the camp, and they would re-escort the person back into the camp. Now, what's interesting is that in its original context, as the Torah is describing all of this, there is no blame that is imparted to the person who is suffering. The words tameh and tahor have been translated impure and pure, and sometimes we give them a moral valence, but that's not originally what they meant. Tameh, which is what the person was designated, meant you cannot be part of the community now. And tahor meant you can now be part of the community. And probably it was a kind of quarantine that our ancestors understood needed to happen. But there was no blame that was assigned. You may know the story about Miriam, the sister of Moses, who gossiped about her brother and was struck with tzara'at, with a skin ailment. That is later in the Torah, and the rabbis associated gossip with tzara'at, with the skin ailments, because they did a play on words. They said one who is motzi shem ra, who is bringing forth a bad reputation in other people, is struck by tzara'at, motzi shem ra, tzara'at. But what they did potentially was not just an interesting play on words, but they planted the seeds for making people feel bad for being ill on top of the bad that they already felt. It made them feel worse. What did I do wrong? Job's so-called friends came to him and said to him, in order for you to be suffering this way, you must have sinned. What did you do? And they urged him to go through the chronicle of his life. What did you do wrong? What did you do wrong? So I want to suggest to us that when we are in the presence of someone, a loved one, a friend, someone in our community, somebody who is suffering, the last thing we want to do is make them feel worse. It is not our job to help them to think about their flaws in that moment. It is our job, I would argue, to do what the Kohen did, which is to be a presence for these individuals, to just be there. What we sometimes do inappropriately with physical illness, we may do even more egregiously when it comes to mental illness. We may say to somebody who is suffering mental illness, some challenge or other, some version of, if only you tried harder, if only you could just get yourself better, snap out of it. We may find ourselves delivering that message explicitly or implicitly. It is never helpful to somebody who is suffering to imply that there is something wrong with them that is resulting in this circumstance, either having started or continuing. There is a poet by the name of John Roydell who suffered mental challenge, and he wrote the following, and I want to share it with us. I would rather you hold me and help me count my tears than try to repair me. Healing isn't a sprint up a mountain, it is a slow walk among the sunflowers. Someday you will save someone's life by not trying to fix them. I would rather you hold me. He's saying it using modern words, but this is ancient wisdom as well. The Kohen did not try to fix. The Kohen held. The Kohen accompanied outside of the camp and back inside of the camp. And the children of Israel were told that they are mamlechet kohanim, that they are a kingdom of priests, of kohanim. So I want to speak to the Kohen inside of each of us, to the priest inside of each of us. For those who are struggling physically, emotionally, spiritually, it doesn't matter which type of struggle, we should channel that inner Kohen. Less, here is what you should do, and more, here I am with you. I hope we can find that strength, which I believe has a much greater chance of providing refuah, the kinds of healing that we all need. Shabbat Shalom.